Cornwall City Council held a special meeting this week with some financial updates. Joining me now to speak a little bit more about it is our Mayor, Bernadette Clements. Welcome back to the show, Madam Mayor.
Hi.
All right, so let's start with the good news. And we saw three surpluses in 2019 within the City of Cornwall, both the wastewater budget, the water budget, and within the operating budget.
Yes, and so that's good news, and those go into reserves. And it's always good to have healthy reserves, especially as we go into more of a period of uncertainty over the next few years. It's good to be able to contribute to reserves.
Absolutely, and that was something that the auditor who presented did highlight on is the importance of reserves and how, for the most part, our reserves are looking good. There is one that does need some to be looked at, but we do see the importance of those reserves as well in terms of the COVID-19 crisis.
Right, exactly. And it was good to talk about the long-term financial plan as well. So you may recall that we put that in a couple of years ago to help us sort of benchmark ourselves as we go forward and plan. But it does look like we're going to have to review that plan, review the policies attached to that plan to make sure that we stay up to date with the financial challenges ahead.
And when we speak about those challenges, at least on paper, the city did post a deficit last year, but there's two factors, and maybe we could talk about them one by one. And one of
Sure.
those, of course, is most of our viewers are probably aware of the tax return that the city was obligated to give to some businesses last year.
Right. So people will understand that properties have to be assessed by MPAC, and so taxes are paid based on the assessment as set by MPAC. And that assessment can be appealed, challenged, changed, and then when it does change, that changes the level of taxes that are owed to the city. So for our city, we had to pay back some significant amount of taxes to distribution centers in our business park. And that was tough. We anticipated those settlements coming. And so we had stocked money away into reserves for that purpose, but it wasn't sufficient to be able to cover that entire cost. So we feel and see the hit in this year's financial statements.
And the other hit comes from the future, actually, in terms of our landfill. And we know that the one that we do have is coming to the end of its life. So let's talk about how that's impacting the books now and how that's going to impact planning in the future.
So this is a major issue. And we looked at this some months ago now. We received a report from a consultant, DFA International, on our landfill and the closure of that landfill, and then the post closure liability. So when you close a landfill, you have to take care of it for the 50 years after you close it. And there's a financial implication with that. So we had to start recording that in our financial statements. And so this year is when we started to do that, as per the consultant telling us that. So the current liability is about 16 to 17 million dollars that had to be included in our financial statements. And people should also be aware that we have about 13 years left on our landfill. So that's a pretty stark reality for the City of Cornwall and its residents. It means that we have to start putting money aside for that post-closure care that we're responsible for. But, and this was a question raised by Councillor McIntosh during the discussion, what happens when you close your landfill? What's the plan for the new landfill? Well, we have to talk about that. We have a few years left to talk about what happens in 13 years when it closes. So we also have to put money aside to have that discussion and to review options.
And of course, all of that is combined with the current financial struggles. Now, we know that we don't have the full picture yet of how COVID-19 is going to affect the city ledgers, but from the perspective of the auditors, it seems like the city is well positioned to exit from this relatively unscathed.
Well, so there were a couple of things that were good. I mean, what I've just talked about in terms of the landfill is stark, and we're aware of it, and we have to plan for that. But there were a couple of good things. I mean, this was a clean audit. We always like to hear that as the people responsible for the finances. But we also heard, in answer to the question, so what happens post-COVID, right? What's the forecast for our finances next year and the year after? And our auditor said, well, you know what, you're in decent shape, particularly if you continue to make sure that your reserves are in good shape, right? So that is the key issue. We lost revenues this year because of COVID. User fees, recreation fees, transit fees. I mean, there was a lot of loss in terms of that. There's a reduction in cost as well. So things sort of balance out. But our auditor felt pretty confident about us being able to weather this storm financially. So that was heartening in terms of news. But it does mean that we have to plan. You know, we have to really make sure that our reserves are healthy.
And maybe we could finish off on that, Madam Mayor. You've already alluded to, of course, the long-term financial plan, but where do we go from here? What are the next steps?
So we're going to review our policies related to the long-term financial plan, and those will need to be updated, especially in light of all of these new circumstances. So we'll be looking at that. And we have to look at our reserves. So our auditor has told us, hey, you're getting a little bit low in terms of the reserves where there are specific targets. So we need to be looking at that. Our operating working reserves need to be beefed up. So council will have to have those discussions. We're going to expect more financial information from our CFO in the coming months. And that'll determine, you know, the next steps. But it's a review of policies, and also a review of how much we're going to be paying back to reserves over the next few months.
Excellent. On that note, Madam Mayor, thank you so much for joining me for this update, and best of luck as we wade into the future.
Thank you, Your TV.